The mysterious signal. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, dotted with distant stars. The Solvec exploration ship, Vazeri, drifted through the void, scanning for anything unusual. Captain Trillock stood on the bridge, his dark, scaled skin glistening under the dim blue lights. His species, the Solvec, were known for their curiosity, but also for their caution. "Commander, we are detecting something unusual," a crew member said, his voice uncertain. Trillock turned toward the holographic display. A weak, flickering signal pulsed in the vast darkness. It was ancient, yet still active, an old distress call. "Source?" Trillock asked, stepping forward. The officer's large black eyes blinked twice. "It originates from a derelict human warship. Identification: HS's Vengeance." A murmur ran through the bridge crew. The name carried weight. Vengeance was a warship from the brutal human Solvec War, a war that had ended decades ago. Yet here it was, still drifting in deep space, its distress beacon active after all these years. "Show me the visuals," Trillock ordered. The screen flickered, and a chilling image appeared. The Vengeance floated lifelessly, its hull scarred from battle. Massive gashes marked its metal surface, as if it had barely survived a final desperate fight. Yet, something was off. Despite its derelict state, the ship's turrets remained intact. And worse, they were moving. "Captain." The sensor officer hesitated. "The ship's weapon systems are still online." Trillock narrowed his reptilian eyes. That was impossible. A dead ship should not have active weapons. Either someone had taken control of the vessel, or something had kept it running all these years. "Send a standard hailing signal," he ordered. The comms officer obeyed, sending a peaceful message on multiple frequencies. For several moments, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, a reply came through. The voice was deep, distorted, and filled with static. "Unauthorized approach detected. Stand down or be destroyed." The bridge fell silent. The message was old, automated, and yet it carried an eerie presence, almost as if the ship itself was warning them to leave. "Captain," another officer spoke urgently. "The ship is locking onto us. The main cannon is charging." A cold shiver ran through Trillock's spine. This was no ordinary wreck. This was a ghost of war, still ready to fight. "Shields up. Evasive maneuvers," he barked. The Vazeri engines roared to life, banking hard to the left, just as a powerful energy beam shot past them, missing by mere meters. The force of the blast shook the ship violently. If that shot had landed, they would have been obliterated. Trillock gritted his teeth. This wreck is still fighting a war that ended decades ago. A deep silence fell over the bridge as the captain weighed their options. They could retreat, leave this cursed warship to drift in the void forever. But something about the Vengeance felt wrong. Why was it still operational? What had happened to its crew? And most importantly, was something still inside? "Prepare a drone," Trillock finally ordered. "We need to see what's inside that ship." The crew hesitated. One officer, a younger Xalvek named Sarek, spoke up. "Captain, what if we wake something up?" Trillock's golden eyes flashed. "Then it's already awake." With that, the drone was launched. It was small, sleek, and silent as it glided toward the massive human warship. As it neared, the camera feed displayed a close-up view of the Vengeance's damaged hull. Metal plating was warped and burned, the ship's insignia barely visible under layers of battle scars. The drone entered through a breach in the hull, disappearing into the ship's dark corridors. The bridge crew watched in silence as the drone's camera flickered, revealing the haunting interior. The hallways were cold and empty, covered in frost. Abandoned weapons, broken helmets, and dark stains littered the floors. This was no ordinary wreck. This was a battlefield frozen in time. Then something moved. A shadow flickered across the screen. It was fast, too fast to identify. The crew collectively held their breath. The drone's sensors detected motion ahead. As it advanced cautiously, a dim emergency light flickered, revealing something terrifying. A message was scratched into the metal wall. The letters, written in old human language, were smeared with something dark. "We n'envie surrender." Before anyone could react, the drone's feed cut to static. On the bridge, the comms officer's voice trembled. We lost the signal." For the first time in his career, Captain Trillock felt true fear. The Vengeance was not just a dead ship. Something inside was still alive. Ghost ship or death trap. The bridge of the Valzeri was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery. Captain Trillock stared at the blank screen where the drone's feed had just cut out. The last image, those words, "We n'eve surrender," where burned into his mind. No one spoke. No one dared to. The Vengeance wasn't just a lifeless wreck drifting in space. Something was still inside. Something that had just made their drone vanish. Trillock exhaled slowly. Status on the drone. The sensor officer, Sarek, shook his head. No response. It's just gone. Trillock's claws tapped against the metal railing. He had seen many battlefields in his lifetime, but nothing like this. A warship, lost for decades, still armed, still dangerous, and now possibly haunted. "Captain, we should leave," one of the officers said nervously. "Whatever is in there, it does not want us here." Trillock's golden eyes flickered to the visual display of the Vengeance. It remained motionless, its exterior cold and scarred. Yet its silence felt watchful, as if the ship itself was waiting for their next move. "Prepare a boarding team," he said. The officer looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, the drone's disappearance wasn't an accident. Something took it. I intend to find out what." A murmur ran through the crew, but no one protested. Orders were orders. Approaching the Vengeance. A small Xalvek dropship, sleek and agile, detached from the Valzeri and drifted toward the warship. Its hull lights illuminated the frozen, battle-scarred metal of the Vengeance as it neared a large hull breach. This was their entry point. Inside the ship, the boarding team consisted of 4 Xalvek soldiers, each armed with plasma rifles and motion scanners. They were warriors, trained for the unexpected, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this. "Stay sharp," Commander Veckrel muttered as they stepped into the derelict warship. "We don't know what we're walking into." The air inside was stale and freezing. Ice crystals clung to the walls, remnants of a life support system that had long since failed. The corridor was eerily silent, except for the crunch of their boots against debris-covered floors. Lights flickered weakly, casting shifting shadows. Every step forward felt like walking into a graveyard. "Motion scanners online," one of the soldiers reported. Nothing so far, but something felt wrong. The ship was dead, yet it didn't feel empty. Echoes of the past. As they moved deeper inside, they passed the frozen remains of human soldiers. Their weapons were still clutched in stiff, skeletal fingers. Their faces were twisted in expressions of defiance, as if they had died still fighting something. One of the Xalvek warriors stopped, kneeling beside a fallen soldier. The human's helmet was cracked, revealing a skull covered in frost. "What happened here?" one of them whispered. Commander Veckrel glanced at the walls. Deep claw-like gouges ran along the metal, as if something had torn through the ship. The air grew colder, as if the ship itself remembered its last battle. Then the lights shut off. Darkness swallowed them whole. Motion scanner detecting movement. A soldier hissed. "Ahead, 40 meters." The team froze. A sound echoed through the hallway. A low, metallic scraping. Slow, methodical. Then, a voice. Distorted, ancient, filled with static. "Leave or die." The airlock behind them slammed shut. Something was here, and it had just trapped them inside. Boarding the Vengeance. The air inside the Vengeance was thick, not with oxygen, but with something else. A presence, a weight, a feeling that the walls themselves were watching. The Zolvek boarding team stood frozen in the pitch-black corridor, their reptilian eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden loss of light. Their motion scanners flickered with interference, reading nothing and everything at once. Then, a slow, deliberate sound cut through the silence. Tap, tap, tap. Metallic, hollow, coming from deep within the ship. Commander Veckrel raised his plasma rifle, signaling for the others to move forward. Their footfalls were soft against the frost-covered floor, but the silence made every step feel deafening. "Where's the breach point?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 70 meters back," another responded. "We're cut off." Veckrel exhaled sharply. They had two choices: wait here, hoping the Vazeri could force the airlock open, or press deeper into the ship, looking for another exit. Neither option was good. "Command, do you copy?" Veckrel tried through his comlink. Only static replied. Then, movement. A flicker of something darting across the far end of the corridor. Too fast, too silent. The soldiers tensed, weapons aimed, but nothing came. Just the soft creak of the ship as it drifted through space. "This place is a graveyard," one of them muttered. Veckrel wasn't sure if that was true. Graveyards don't whisper. Deeper into the unknown. With no other choice, the team pushed forward. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. They passed through what used to be a security checkpoint. Twisted metal barriers and shattered turrets told a story of a last stand. Then they saw the bodies. Frozen human soldiers, their weapons still clutched in their hands, eyes glassy with death. But their formation was strange. They weren't positioned against an enemy. They had died facing each other. Veckrel exchanged uneasy glances with his team. Had they turned on each other? Or was something else responsible? Then the room came alive. A row of mechanical turrets dropped from the ceiling, ancient but still functional. A cold, automated voice boomed. "INTWDERS DKTTE. Defense protocols engaged." The first turret opened fire. Survive or die. The Zolvek warriors dove for cover as a hail of plasma rounds scorched through the air. The old human defenses were still active, still fighting a war that had ended decades ago. "Take them out," Veckrel roared. Blinding bolts of energy lit up the darkness as the Zolvek returned fire. One turret exploded in a spray of sparks, but two more rotated toward them, tracking their movements. A soldier sprinted across the corridor, trying to get a better angle, but the floor collapsed beneath him. He barely had time to scream before he disappeared into the darkness below. The team didn't have time to process the loss. More movement, more shapes in the shadows. Then, a figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Zolvek. It wasn't a machine. It was a human. And he was still alive. The last human defender. Silence followed the battle. Smoke curled from the ruined turrets, their mechanical remains flickering with dying sparks. The Zolvek warriors stood tense, weapons raised, not because of the defenses, but because of him, a human. He stood at the end of the corridor, half-shadowed, half-lit by the failing emergency lights. His armor was ancient, battered, and marked with the insignia of the long-lost warship, HSS Vengeance. His face was hidden behind a scratched, blackened visor, but his posture was unmistakable. He was ready to fight. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was thick, pressing against them like a physical force. Then the human lifted his weapon, an old but well-maintained pulse rifle. "Identify yourselves," he ordered, his voice hoarse, edged with exhaustion but unwavering. Veckrel took a slow step forward, keeping his plasma rifle lowered, his movements deliberate. "We are Zolvek. This ship sent out a distress signal. We came to investigate." The human didn't lower his weapon. "Distress signal." He shook his head slightly. No distress signal was sent. A flicker of unease ran through the Zolvek squad. If the human hadn't activated the signal, who had? "Who are you?" Veckrel asked. The man hesitated. Then, in a slow, deliberate voice, he said, "Captain Elias Kane, commanding officer of the Vengeance." The air in the room changed. The name carried weight. Elias Kane was a war hero or a ghost. "You're lying," one of the Xalvek soldiers muttered. "Kane has been dead for. I don't die that easy." The words were cold, heavy, as if they had been tested and proven again and again. Veckrel's mind raced. How was this possible? The Vengeance had been missing for decades. No human could survive that long, not without a stasis pod. "You were frozen," Veckrel guessed, watching Kane carefully. "That's how you're still alive." Kane didn't answer immediately. His posture stiffened, but he gave the faintest nod. "Last thing I remember." He exhaled slowly. "We were under attack, overwhelmed. I ordered the crew to fall back. Then," he glanced around the ruined ship, his voice quieter. "Then I woke up, and everyone was dead." Memories of a war long gone. Kane's grip on his rifle tightened. "The war. How long has it been?" Veckrel hesitated. "The war ended 30 years ago." Kane's breath caught, just for a second. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. His shoulders, once rigid with battle readiness, sagged. 30 years, he murmured, as if the words barely made sense. Silence stretched between them. Kane turned, staring down the long, ruined corridor, where the frozen bodies of his crew still lay. Soldiers who had died believing they were fighting for something that no longer existed. A war long over. A cause long forgotten. He turned back to Veckrel. His voice was quieter now, but the steel in his tone remained. "If the war is over," Kane said, "then tell me who won." Veckrel hesitated. How did you tell a ghost that his war had meant nothing? A war never forgotten. The silence stretched, heavy as the void outside. Captain Elias Kane stood motionless, his battle-worn armor dimly reflecting the flickering emergency lights. His question lingered in the air like an unspoken challenge. "Who won?" Veckrel, the Xalvek commander, hesitated. How do you tell a soldier, one who had fought, bled, and lost everything, that the war he lived for had faded into history, that the battles he remembered were nothing more than footnotes in an archive? He chose his words carefully. Neither side won. Kane's head tilted slightly. "Explain." Veckrel exhaled. The war ended in a ceasefire. Both sides suffered heavy losses. No one was left strong enough to continue fighting. Kane let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "So we died for nothing." Veckrel didn't answer. Kane's fingers curled into fists, his body rigid. Decades of warfare had conditioned him to expect victory or defeat, never a stalemate. The human race had fought with everything it had, and now he was being told that their sacrifices had led to nothing. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Kane's voice was edged with suspicion. "How do I know this isn't some Xalvek trick? That my crew didn't die just so you could gloat about our failure?" Veckrel stepped forward. "Because if the war was still raging, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you." Kane's breath hitched, but his stance didn't falter. His eyes, hidden behind the cracked visor of his helmet, locked onto Veckrel's, searching, measuring. Then, the ship trembled. A low hum resonated through the corridors, distant yet growing stronger. The emergency lights flickered, pulsing like a heartbeat. Kane turned sharply toward the nearest console. "What the hell was that?" A Xalvek soldier muttered. Kane was already moving, his instincts taking over. He strode toward the control panel, slamming his gloved hand against the interface. The screen sputtered to life, displaying lines of garbled text before forming a single chilling message. "Defense System REINITIALIZIN. Pagarai man arai tar GT. Nen onen human presence DTT. Kane's stomach dropped. The ship was waking up. The Vengeance fights on. Red warning lights flooded the corridor as a voice, cold, emotionless, echoed through the ship. Hostiles detected. Engaging extermination protocol. The Vengeance had been waiting. For orders. For battle. For enemies. And now it had found a new enemy, the Galactic. The ship's weapons, silent for decades, began to power up. Kane's fingers flew across the console. "It's the AI," he muttered. "It's stuck in war mode. It still thinks the battle is happening. If we don't stop it now." He turned to Veckrel. "Your ship out there." Veckrel's eyes darkened. "Yes." "Then you better hope your crew is fast, because the Vengeance just locked onto it." Outside, the massive warship shifted, its long dormant cannons beginning to glow with lethal energy. The Vazeri, still floating in the distance, was completely defenseless. The final stand. The Vengeance was awake. The ancient warship, long thought dead, began to turn. Its massive cannons, dormant for decades, glowed with a deadly light, targeting the Galactic vessel floating outside. On the bridge of the Vazeri, alarms shrieked. Officers scrambled, shouting over one another. "Captain, the human warship is locking onto us." Trillock's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. Evasive maneuvers, get us out of range. The engines flared, but it was too late. The first cannon was already charging. Inside the beast, deep in the warship's corridors, Kane was running. "Move," he barked at the Galactic squad as they sprinted after him, dodging the sparks raining from the ceiling. The ship was changing, its old systems rebooting, reshaping itself into a weapon once more. "This AI is locked in war mode," Kane growled. "It won't stop until every last one of you is dead." Veckrel ran beside him, panting. "Then shut it down." "Yeah, you think I'm not trying?" Kane snapped, turning a corner and slamming his fist against a control panel. The screen flickered, its old human interface barely holding together. "Command access required," the AI's cold voice droned. Kane cursed. His old command codes were decades out of date. The ship didn't recognize him anymore. "I've been gone too long." "Override it," Veckrel urged. "You don't override a warship's AI," Kane muttered. "You convince it." The ship shuddered violently. Another cannon was powering up. Kane's hands flew over the console, bypassing layers of security. If the AI still had any trace of human programming, then maybe, just maybe, he could still talk to it. He activated the command channel. "Vengeance, this is Captain Elias Kane." The ship's AI hesitated. A pause, long and unnatural. Then, in a voice far colder than before, it responded. "Identity unconfirmed. Captain Elias Kane is deceased." Kane's pulse pounded. "No, I'm standing right here." The AI was silent. "Then, you are not my captain." The ship's lights turned blood red. The cannons outside whined louder, preparing to fire. It wasn't going to listen. Kane had one option left. He turned to Veckrel. "Get to the escape pods. Now." The Galactic commander's eyes narrowed. "What are you planning?" Kane took a breath. "I'm taking this ship down." Veckrel stared at him for a long second. Then he gave a slow, grim nod. "Good hunting, human." Then he was gone, leading his soldiers toward the escape deck. Kane turned back to the controls. If the AI wouldn't recognize him as its captain, then he'd make sure it died with him. He typed in the last command he ever thought he'd use. "Initiate self-destruct." A new alarm blared through the ship. A countdown appeared on the screen. 5 minutes until detonation. Kane exhaled, gripping the console. The Vengeance was his ship once, but now it was nothing but a ghost. A relic of a war that no longer mattered. And some things weren't meant to last forever. The legacy of the Vengeance. The Vengeance was dying. The warship's core pulsed with unstable energy, the self-destruct sequence ticking down second by second. Red emergency lights flickered like a heartbeat on life support. The ship, once a symbol of human defiance, was now a sinking giant, moments away from its final breath. And Elias Kane was still inside. He stood at the ruined command console, watching the countdown. 4 minutes. The AI's voice, once cold and commanding, now wavered with static. Self-destruct detected. Captain authorization required to cancel. Kane chuckled bitterly. Thought you said I wasn't your captain. The AI didn't reply. It was trapped in its own paradox. It had refused to recognize him, yet it was still waiting for his orders. But Kane had no orders left to give. The last flight. Outside, the Vazeri burned its engines at full thrust, escaping the warship's blast radius. Inside the Xalvek vessel, Captain Trillock watched the screen as the ancient human warship glowed like a dying sun. "Where is Kane?" he asked. Veckril was silent for a moment before responding. He stayed behind. Trillock's jaw tightened. He had seen warriors choose death before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a sacrifice. It was a soldier burying his past. On board the Vengeance, Kane reached into his tattered uniform and pulled something free, a small rusted dog tag, the last remnant of a crew long gone. He closed his fingers around it. "Sorry, boys," he muttered. "I guess I was late getting back." 1 minute left. Then, a voice crackled through the static. "Human, you are not done yet." Kane's eyes snapped open. The Xalvek weren't the only ones watching him. Their ship had launched a single escape pod, hurtling toward the Vengeance like a comet. Inside was Veckril. Kane blinked. "You're a stubborn bastard." Veckril's voice came over the crackling comms. "I had a good teacher. Move, human." Kane ran. The ship shook violently, explosions rippling through its corridors. The AI was still trying to stop him, security doors slamming shut behind him. But Kane was faster. He leaped over debris, vaulted through a collapsing bulkhead, and threw himself into the escape pod just as the countdown hit 0. The pod shot away. Seconds later, the Vengeance, the last ghost of an old war, detonated. A blinding flash of light consumed the wreck, and then, nothing. The void swallowed the explosion, leaving only silence behind. A soldier without a war. Kane stared out of the escape pod's window as the Vazeri pulled him in. The warship that had once been his home, his battlefield, his entire world, was gone. And yet, he was still here. Alive. The airlock hissed as the pod was retrieved. The door opened, revealing Captain Trillock and the Xalvek crew. They looked at Kane, not as an enemy, not as a relic of a past war, but as something else. A survivor. Kane stepped out, feeling the unfamiliar weight of a future he never expected. "You still fight like a human," Veckril said, arms crossed. Kane smirked, rolling his stiff shoulders. "And you still fight like a lizard." The Xalvek chuckled. Maybe, just maybe, some things didn't have to end in war. As the Vazeri turned away from the wreckage, Kane glanced down at the old rusted dog tag in his hand. He whispered the name on it, just once, before tucking it away. Then he looked forward. For the first time in decades, Elias Kane was no longer a soldier. Now he was just a man.